Hi, welcome to Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, thanks for watching. Well, the legislature may be on summer recess, but a bunch of commissions that are looking into some very important issues that confront the state have not been. We'll talk about those subjects, plus the federal debt limit, what's going to happen with Medicare and Medicaid with one of our analysts, Jim Redmond, all of that and more following these words.
This is Pennsylvania Newsmakers, a fast-paced, unrehearsed weekly discussion with and about the leaders who shape your world. And now, here's your host, Terry Madonna.
Hi, welcome back to the program. I forgot, I'm supposed to say Pennsylvania politics and government in depth and in detail, but what can you expect? It's hot and it's summer, and if the host screws up a bit, don't worry about it. Joining me, as often is the case, is Robert Swift. He's with Times-Shamrock newspapers, and Laura Olson, she's with the Pittsburgh Post-Gazette. All right, Laura, I'm going to start with you. Marcellus Shale, it's the issue that won't go away. We now have a set of recommendations that ends up on the governor's desk, and give me, if there are two or three things, what were the most important recommendations made by the commission?
Well, at the commission's final meeting on July 15th, they went through 96 recommendations.
Oh my God.
It was a long day and a long meeting. But a couple of the key ones that folks were looking for: tax or fee. What are they saying about that? They said an impact fee could be needed, that there are some uncompensated was the word they used, costs that some of these local governments are dealing with, and that there needs to be some sort of way for those governments and other organizations to kind of recoup those costs.
Impact fee is one.
They didn't outline how, but they said go get to it.
Now, Robert, the other thing is they also talked about some recommendations that they received from the Department of Environmental Protection. I think some 26 of them that dealt with license. And
These
give
are
us an overview
basically
of that.
the strengthen some of the well siting provisions for when you drill a well, how far back from, a water source or someone else's well, what you have to notify the property owners when you're going to dig a well, increasing penalties for violations, bonding. These are all the state's Oil and Gas Act, dates back to 1984, and it's never been written to cover the deep well drilling of the Marcellus.
Now, generally speaking, the environmental community has had sort of a mixed reaction to these recommendations. They were originally upset over the composition of the commission. They felt that about a third of the people were, quote, representatives of the interest groups. But I think on those 26 recommendations, Laura, there seemed to be some sense in which that got support. I don't know if either of you interviewed folks in the environmental. Go ahead.
Yeah, on the environmental oversight provisions, those were some things that Jan Jarrett of Penn Future and folks like that were saying, well, these are some things we've wanted for a while. There's been legislation to try and start updating some of these pieces, boosting fines, boosting the bonding requirement. So if a driller leaves their well and something needs to happen, there's a little bit of an insurance policy.
Now, there's one other. Go ahead. You want to make a comment?
What's funny about
that?
this commission, you suddenly realize sitting there, commissions are for, broad policy strokes. And that's what Lieutenant Governor Culley, the chairman, was urging people not to get too into the weeds on stuff, except for these environmental ones.
They got into the weeds on those.
And that was from DEP. But the rest of it was general. In fact, the impact fee, I call it a generic impact fee. No, they didn't get into any really detail at all, except what it may be used for.
All right, one of the things that I'm still unsure about and unclear about, that's why you folks are here, you're going to straighten this out. It's called pooling. It's a question where you go down, you go down in a well, right? You drill down, you go out. Now, in the old days, if I get this right, the shallow wells, you went down, you didn't go far out. But now with this pooling and with natural gas and with fracking and the new technology, you can go down and you can go out. My understanding is almost a mile horizontally under someone's land. Now, what did the commission actually say about that?
They said that pooling is something that needs to be looked at. It's one of these generic recommendations as well. But pooling has to do with how the land is put together for this unit of that's going to be drilled. And so if this land over here has been leased, but this land hasn't, or if this land chunk has been leased to two different companies, then it makes it harder to go down and over and get all the gas
Now, that
off.
wasn't a problem. You've written about, I know in the past you've covered this. This never was a big issue before so much.
I mean, it's actually, there's some pooling stuff in a law that goes back 50 years, but this is different kind of, that kind of shallow well drilling was more minimal impact on the surrounding property owners. This is a major impact, and you're bumping right up against the, the property rights
And the property rights issue is going to be a big deal.
Exactly.
Isn't it?
It's been up, especially in the areas where the drilling is. It's been there historically with wetlands and other issues.
We're going to run to break. I want to get into this whole proposal to sell the liquor stores. But what did they actually recommend? I've read some places where it said they recommended pooling, which means down and out, property rights, okay. But then I've read where they just said something that should be considered.
RB referred to the law that's in place, and they said that needs to be looked at because the Marcellus Shale's here. There's other shale layers. Those are going to get involved in the drilling process, and we need to treat them all the same.
All right, it's very likely that this question of should we sell off the state-owned liquor stores. They've been around since the end of Prohibition. It's been tried before by governors. We'll talk with our two reporters about what's in a proposal that was made by the House Majority Leader and the prospects for passage following these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the Pennsylvania Chamber of Business and Industry, the statewide voice of business, and by the Pennsylvania Cyber Charter School, bringing educational innovation and freedom to the children of Pennsylvania. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by ReconnectPA.org, supporting a comprehensive transportation funding solution, and by the Pennsylvania Manufacturers Association. Business in Pennsylvania is our business.
Hi, back to the program. Well, the other big agenda item that's likely to dominate the fall agenda in the legislature, and it will be this whole business of sell off the liquor stores. RB, you've been around this subject a long time. How many times? Thornburg, who tried this?
Thornburg twice, then Ridge, and now this will be the fourth.
Yeah.
Big push.
All right. Let's sort of give me a couple of the major elements, and you and Laura can go through this, that are in the bill. Written, apparently, or you know what I mean, sponsored by Mike Turzai, the majority leader. What
struck me about this one is that he really expanded it beyond the earlier efforts to create up to 1,250 licenses, two categories.
Double the licenses.
Yeah, one for the big retailers and another for the independent niche stores, and that's different from what Ridge certainly did, and that's different. Thornburg never really had a plan to go that far out. He thought it would happen. So Turzai, and this is a revision from his bill last year, has sort of really upped the stakes on this.
That piece could be a little bit of a response to, well, you're going to take away all these jobs because they're just going to go to Giant or Walmart or the grocery store, and someplace where they won't need more employees. But if it's a niche wine shop or something that currently doesn't exist, they'll need employees.
And without getting into the weeds, they're talking basically about two kinds of licenses, aren't they? Yeah. One will be for go ahead.
Yeah, the big box guys.
Yeah.
The Targets, Walmarts, grocery stores.
And that was your point, and then you have the smaller, go ahead.
And the smaller folks, you know, a private liquor store, a small niche, like high-end wine store.
Now, we still have large parts of the state, I don't know how, I've not actually looked at this, about where they don't sell alcohol at all,
There's a lot of dry municipalities. The plan is that for the big licenses that the liquor board would sort of create market zones to put them in. So there'd be some geographical distribution. Then what Turzai's saying for the smaller, they could sort of fill in fill out the bigger licenses. That's how they would try to do that to cover the state.
And what about the enforcement or regulations? Is there any? Would that be under the Attorney General, or would that be? Or haven't he's got?
That would still be LCB, the Liquor Control Board.
Oh, the liquor. Yeah. They would not immediately get rid. Or the Liquor Control Board itself would still continue to exist.
And they would give, yes, and they still would have the state police doing the stuff, and they would still give, quote, local law enforcement would be given. I'm not sure how that would play out.
Yeah. But. The opposition, typically, Mothers Against Drunk Driving, the commercial union, retail union workers, whatever the exact name is.
The United Food and Commercial Workers.
Commercial Workers, thank you. Thank you, I should know that.
Well, and they had folks at the press conference to unveil this who
were
were shouting a little bit and asking some questions that Representative Turzai ignored.
And then you have something else, conservative lawmakers. I know that I read some of the accounts that you and your colleagues wrote, where you got conservative Republican lawmakers who are saying, well, we're not quite so sure. Is this, Robert, the expansion issue and alcohol?
Expansion, you have a lot of these people represent the dry municipalities, instead of looking at it, where people voted not to have any sales at all. So they're looking at always what's in it for me. That issue. That's always been a factor. Then you have Democrats in some of the larger cities still concerned about the union jobs, and that informal coalition has always been the hurdle for this.
Yeah. So you've got conservative lawmakers, you have Mothers Against Drunk Driving, and you have the unions. Now, have you got any sense about how serious the House Majority Leader is about this? Do you think this is something, I mean, I know I'm asking you to speculate, that is likely to come up for a vote in the House in the fall?
Well, when we asked him about it, when he unveiled it, I asked where it was at the top of, on his priority list for the fall, and he said it's at the very top.
Uh-oh.
What did he say? Was it? He thought it'd be an easy lift.
Yeah, he thought
easy lift.
He said he thought it would be an easy lift.
You've been covering this story for a long time. Easy lift.
I'm not even sure in all the other proposals that they ever came to a vote on the floor.
Yeah, I'm not either. I don't remember that.
The only vote I know is when they had to give it a 10-year sunset back in '87, and they gave the enforcement to the state police.
Well, we're going to see. Look, great update on two issues that undoubtedly, would you both agree, yes or no, will dominate the fall agenda? You think?
They'll be up there.
Yeah, you agree?
Definitely.
All right, Jim Redmond with the Hospital Association. We got a lot going on in healthcare. We're going to ask him also about the federal debt limit and more. After talk about money and bills, we're going to pay some now.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is brought to you by Pennsylvania Credit Union Association. Pennsylvania Credit Unions, where people are worth more than money. To find a credit union that is right for you, check out ibelong.org. And by the Energy Association of Pennsylvania, Pennsylvania's energy information source. This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by the State System of Higher Education. 14 state-owned universities. The state system is the largest provider of higher education in Pennsylvania. And by the Hospital and Healthsystem Association of Pennsylvania, working towards a healthy Pennsylvania.
Hi, welcome back to the program. Well, as you know, the gentleman sitting across from me, Jim Redmond, is a regular guest on our program. He's one of our healthcare experts we call in. He's the Senior VP at the Hospital and Healthsystem Association. Jim, before we get into, I know the issues that I want to talk about with you. You've been, covering the legislature in your job. And do you remember a time when it's summer, the legislature goes, but we have all these commissions, and one that we're going to talk about next week, this big transportation commission. It's like the lawmakers are gone, but these huge issues are being debated and discussed. What's the point here?
Interesting. After 9 years of having to deal with a budget through the summer, everybody thought it was going to be a slow summer, and it hasn't, particularly on the issues that you identified, and even some healthcare issues that are going to come up this fall.
Yeah, and I want to get into those in a minute with you. The other thing is this fall agenda, both in healthcare and all these, looks like a huge, and they come back like the legislature returns, what, the second or third week in September?
Senate comes back the 19th and the House the week after that.
And then, they'll take the customary couple weeks break for, they have a week off, or not, a Columbus Day, then we have to do the election, and then they got a lot to do, and redistricting, right?
They do. There's a lot on their plate.
Yeah, all right. Well, look, I want to talk, there is no issue that I think is more controversial and seems to have flummoxed the lawmakers and the president than the federal debt limit. What is the relationship between that federal debt limit and health care, for example?
Sure. Let's talk about the deficit and the debt limit issue. If you look at last year, about for every man, woman, and child, the federal government brought in about $7,000, but we spent about $11,000 per person, the difference being the deficit.
Yeah.
Now, how do they...
I like that way, by the way. I've not heard that before. I only hear this 14.3. I have to write that down and use it. Go ahead. That's a good way to think about it.
The difference is the deficit, and what we've been doing as a nation is borrowing that. Yeah. And when we reach August 2nd, we've hit the cap that is in place. Congress has to approve legislation to allow the federal government to borrow more money, and they're looking to raise the cap roughly around $2.4 trillion.
Get us through at least the 2012 election?
I would guess that would be the case.
We wonder why, right? That would
right. And we have a big debate going on between the President and Congress over the debt limit and how the deficit is going to be reduced, because a number of lawmakers are intent, including the President, that there's got to be some more balancing of the budget before we proceed to borrow more money.
Yeah. Well, look, before I want to get into a couple of other things, but one of the problems, and it certainly goes to two programs that I know that you watch very carefully and that hospitals and other healthcare operations care about deeply, Medicare and Medicaid, and also Social Security. I mean, the debate is what will happen to those programs, because most folks believe that they're part of the drivers, if you will, maybe a big part of the drivers of the debt and the long term. So go ahead.
Well, Medicare and Medicaid account for about 22% of the federal budget. Right. So any time that you're talking about reducing the deficit and reducing spending, those programs are going to be impacted. Now, the latest proposal from the so-called Gang of Six, this is the bipartisan group of senators, speaks about $85 billion in cuts in health care programs, but it really lacks specifics in terms of understanding sort of the details of how that impacts us.
There was it's a 6-page summary or something, and that's been some. Well, but can you, look, with 75 million baby boomers, in 07 reaching 30, I've seen numbers like $45–50 trillion in cost to run Medicare, for example, alone. Can the budget be balanced, do you think, without adjustments to either or both, probably Medicare and Medicaid? Is it possible?
I think it's inevitable that there's going to have to be changes, because they can't get to the end goal without impacting on those programs, and that's why we are concerned from the healthcare standpoint. Even under the federal Affordable Care Act, the healthcare reform bill that was passed last year, hospitals are projected to take about $155 billion cut over the next 10 years nationwide. That's about $9 billion here in Pennsylvania. So we're saying we've already contributed to reducing it. Be careful about going forward.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to take a break. I want to ask Jim, when we come back, the Affordable Health Care law is in the process of being implemented in the states, and we've got these insurance exchanges that are being set up. I want to ask Jim about that, because could have a big effect on health care for all Pennsylvanians? Is that yes or no? Something we all ought to pay attention to. Jim Redmond will help us understand that after these words.
This broadcast of Pennsylvania Newsmakers is presented by Highmark Blue Shield, changing the way health plans work for business, with a variety of plan options for employers and more choices for employees. Information is available at highmark.com. Have a greater hand in your company's health. And by the Pennsylvania Healthcare Association, the future of long-term care.
Hi, welcome back to the program with Jim Redmond. All right, look, the Affordable Health Care law requires that each state set up these so-called insurance exchanges that will help implement that law itself. Tell me about the purpose of the law again.
Yeah, it was intended to provide for consumers an easy way to make choices among health insurance plans out there. I kind of liken it to Expedia or Orbitz in terms of the travel industry. You can go up on the internet.
Will we get it cheaper?
Well, the idea is to create competition by having more consumer choice. Now, also under the Affordable Care Act, there are subsidies for certain low-income individuals, and those subsidies are also driven by that insurance exchange. The insurance department is in the process of setting up some stakeholder meetings around the Commonwealth to get input on how these ought to be designed.
Now, with this, hold on, I want you to go there further, but to go back to your original point, does that mean, now, if I have insurance with my company, will my company be dealing with the exchange to try to get...
That's one of the issues that is unresolved as to whether or not that particular piece will be included, whether these exchanges will be the exclusive means by which individuals get insurance. Now, a number of employers are anticipated to really drop their employee coverage so that and
pay this so-called tax or fee, whatever they're calling it.
And then those individuals would use the exchange to go and purchase their insurance.
Now, if that were to happen, I mean, do you think that's what will happen because of the rising healthcare costs, that employers will just simply drop it? And
there have been numerous reports that that is likely to occur.
well, then the employee, you think then the employer will give the employee, oh, we're going to give you $5,000 a year, you go buy your own insurance. You think that's where the trend is going to be?
I think for some employers that's going to be where they're going to end up.
All right, now, give me the time frame in which you think this will occur.
The law requires the states to have these in place by the beginning of 2014. They've got to be certified a year earlier. The state has to demonstrate that they're ready to do that, to implement that a year ahead of time. So the next 18 months becomes a critical period of time for state government here to determine how this is going to be put into place.
Now, some states are resisting this. I've read where, you know, not everybody is on the same page about that. I don't know if some states will not do it at all. I mean, that would conceivably get them into some legal difficulty. Having said that, will Pennsylvania meet the deadline, do you think? Are we on course to do that?
I think the general consensus is that it would be better for Pennsylvania to have some control over its own destiny. And as opposed to if those states that decide not to do it, then the federal government does it for them. I think Pennsylvania is headed in a direction where we'll probably establish them here in Pennsylvania. And there are really sort of two models out there. These are not some states already have them in place. Massachusetts being the most extensive,
right.
Utah being sort of the other approach. And I think Pennsylvania will go in the direction of sort of the Utah approach as opposed to the Massachusetts
And some
approach.
governors have really resisted this. Tom Corbett, even though he filed that lawsuit with, what, 24 states
26
are now
states, I think.
Whatever it is that are working its way up, we know, going to go to the Supreme Court on that. He has not resisted implementing the law. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Well, you would expect that from the guy was a former attorney general, right? He may not like it, but he's obviously going to implement it. You think that's right?
Right, and they seem to be going through a very methodical approach to try to gain as much support and interest in how this ought to be put together.
All right, great update. All right, thanks for that addition, that assistance. All right, we'll see you next week for another edition of Pennsylvania Newsmakers, and as always, you stay well.